Hi, I'm Betty Mascareñas from Embudo Presbyterian, and I guess I've got a long history here. I came in 1954 as a young registered nurse, fresh out of college, and I came to work at Embudo Presbyterian Hospital out on the highway. I was fascinated with the medical history here in northern New Mexico, and was able to visit this when I was still in nursing school in Pueblo, Colorado. I came to visit my aunt, Lois Plummer, who was a teacher at the Chimayo John Hyson School, stayed overnight, talked her into taking us to Embudo Hospital, a classmate of mine and I fell in love with Embudo Presbyterian Hospital. It was only 12 years old by the time I got there. But the story of the medical missions here has been fascinating to me. In the late 1800s, there were mission teachers here, as our other people have been saying. And those teachers were having to go out into the homes and help with people who were very sick. And they said, we need medical care here. We need help. And so they appealed to the Board of Home Missions at the National Church. And one thing led to another. And in 1914, the first nurses came. And Brooklyn Cottage Hospital was built with the help of Brooklyn Nassau Presbyterian on the East Coast for $3,500. The hospital grew quickly, and they tried to get doctors to come and stay, and nobody would stay very long. Everything was just a little too primitive. But the need was great. The Board of Home Missions sent Dr. Sarah Bowen to come and evaluate what kind of help was truly needed, what kind of staffing was needed, did they need a regular doctor. Dr. Bowen, who grew up in China of missionary parents, was going back to be a missionary doctor in China. So on her way out to the West Coast, where I guess she was going to be called, she stopped here and came up to look at our missions up here and said, yes, they do need more staffing. They need a regular medical doctor. The thing of it is, Dr. Bowen tried to get back to Santa Fe to catch her train back to the West Coast to go to China, but there was a huge snowstorm and she was grounded, or you don't get grounded when you're taking a train, but I guess she was not able to get to Santa Fe. And so she stayed here and she never left. 1932. And she, I think, retired in the 1960s. Incredible. So a lot of people around here are saying, oh, I was born at the hospital. Dr. Bowen delivered me. By 1940, or after that, with a regular doctor here, that little hospital, Brooklyn Cottage Hospital, just was bursting at the seams. It went from 2 rooms to 6 rooms, and it was just terribly crowded. And so in 1940, the new hospital was built out on the highway, which it still stands today. It was a modern 25-bed hospital, 8 bassinets, and 4 clinics, 4 outpatient clinics. Penasco had a clinic every week. Over in Holman, a clinic was there once a month, which was the start of the Moore Valley Medical Unit and started a whole new mission, medical care over there. Ranchos de Taos had another clinic, as did Truchas. And Truchas had a resident nurse that worked there. And at Embudo, of course, there were office visits, office clinic hours every day. My first Christmas here, I was on duty with another nurse at night. We took our presents from the dorm over to open them under the Christmas tree in the dining room, beautiful dining room. And we were all set to have our own little Christmas during 2:00 in the morning or something like that. At midnight, the emergency bell rang, and before we knew it, we had delivered 3 babies. 1, 2, 3. That was the busiest Christmas Eve I've ever known. It was wonderful. Dr. Bowen, let me back up a minute. Some of the diseases that we had, that we saw a lot of, that I hadn't seen in my home territory of North Dakota. Dysentery was a huge problem. Little babies would come in with the soft spot on their head, the fontanelle sunken in. They were so dehydrated and at death's door. And immediately we started giving them fluids and reviving them. Over and over that happened because the parents were giving them ditch water, not boiling that and all that kind of stuff. Gallbladder disease, and surprisingly, when you think about it, not surprisingly, leukemia. Los Alamos was getting started. People paid their bills, yes, sometimes with money, but oftentimes with chickens, hogs. There's stories of the cook at Brooklyn Cottage Hospital having to butcher the hog and doing all that work to have food for both the staff and the patients. We had surgeons coming in from Santa Fe, and we had elective surgery once a month, or once a week, but the doctors were on call for us, and if we had an emergency appendix was about to burst or something, they would come out from Santa Fe, or if we had to have a cesarean section. Very, very responsive. They were wonderful. Some of the things that we did at Embudo Presbyterian Hospital that were different from an ordinary hospital, I guess you'd say, is that prayer was a very important part of our lives. We started the morning, every morning, with devotions in the dining room, the staff dining room, before we had breakfast even. Every day we had a regular daily corridor service. There's a little pump organ there, and it's now at the Manal Library. Every bedside had a Bible and a hymn book. And when it was time for the corridor service, we'd bring the chairs out from the patient's room. Those who could would join us, and the visitors as well. Others joined from their bedside. And different staff members would take turns doing the devotions. On Sundays, the minister from this church would come over and have a special service, and then go around and talk to the patients. We had prayers before. If the patient was going to go to surgery, he was either on his bed or on the stretcher already, ready to go to the operating room, and we would pray with him. And all of those things were so special. We had a weekly Bible study at the nurses' residence, led by various staff members, and all the staff were invited to that, which included the auxiliary helpers that we had who lived at at the hospital. Transportation was poor, and people had to stay at the dorms. And so we had workers from Penasco, Truchas, various places would come and work here. And they also were involved in the Bible study as they wanted to. None of this was forced on anybody. I was reminded the other day that you should preach a sermon every day. And if you have to, use words. And that's what we did. We preached a sermon every day by our actions. Eventually, the hospital had a wonderful staff. I think our staff was great at that time in the 50s. But eventually we had an internist, a family practitioner, and a surgeon. And our director of nurses was also a nurse anesthetist. And so if there was an emergency, car accident, a gunshot wound, which happened, all those kinds of things, we didn't have to wait for somebody to come from Santa Fe to help us. We had the whole staff right there and could take care of it. I do remember vividly somebody was shot over at the local bar and brought immediately to the hospital and would have died within the hour, but the staff was able to get right to it and help them. As roads improved and the hospitals in Taos and Espanola got better, also because of insurance and Medicare paperwork and all of that kind of thing, it got very expensive to run the hospital. And the Board of National Missions saw fit to close it. And Charlotte, you would probably have the dates. I think it was in the 70s when the hospital closed. But it is still a very important part of a lot of people's lives, not only here in Dixon, but in the surrounding area. I also want to say before I close is that people came from southern Colorado, from Santa Fe, from across the mountains in Mora, in Chacon and Holman, to bring their family members. Babies were born here that came from all these areas. Even people who had moved out to California when they knew, that they were, the mother was pregnant, they would come back to Embudo to have their babies, which is a nice compliment. Another good compliment was a surgeon that we had from Santa Fe, Dr. Derbyshire, who came up to take care of this little girl, oh my gosh, 5 or 6 years old, whose appendix had ruptured and her abdomen was tight, was so infected. He came, did what he could. He said, I don't give a wooden nickel for this little girl's life, but if she gets well anywhere, she'll get well here. And she did. She went home. Lots and lots of stories. I could tell you about the tonsillectomy clinic. I could tell you about the fiestas that always brought patients in, but that's for another time. Thank you.